Twilight and Princess Celestia stepped out of Sugar Cube Corner dejectedly. The hopes of finding a trinket of some sort that Pinkie Pie held dear had been dashed the moment they saw her old room empty of all its contents. Even though it hadn't been long since the party mare had died, the Cakes felt that selling or donating her things would help speed up the healing process. They loved her dearly, after all, and it still hurt to see her not bouncing around the bakery, making all kinds of crazy, delicious things. "So, what now?" Twilight asked her mentor. "Where do we go now? I was sure we'd find something here." "I suppose that we could travel to her old home, from when she was a filly. However," Celestia said, "I'm afraid I don't know exactly where that is, nor what I would look for, even if I did." The unicorn thought for a moment and stepped back inside the oversized gingerbread house, while Princess waited outside patiently. It made sense to ask the Cakes if Pinkie ever mentioned where her rock farm home was. Surely it had come up from time to time. Shortly after, Twilight stepped back outside with a cautious, optimistic look. "They told me your home was a bit southeast of Dodge Junction, about 8 or 10 miles from town," Twilight said. "Then we had best get to move on. It's easily a day and a half travel by train. Hopefully we'll be able to find some pony who knows exactly where her old home is." "Can't you just fly us there?" "I'm afraid even at my top speed, it won't be that much quicker. Your friend Rainbow Dash really was the fastest flyer in Equestria," Celestia stated. "Even faster than you?" "Yes, my student. I also thought of using a long-range teleportation spell, but over such distances the results can be rather unpredictable. We could inadvertently end up hopelessly lost in the middle of nowhere. The safest method is by train." The lavender mare sighed, frustrated. "It feels like this is taking longer than it should to get prepared for this ritual. Which is why we mustn't tarry any longer. Now come, we have a train to catch." It was 10 after 4 when the next ride to Dodge Junction finally left the station. According to the signpost, they should arrive at 9:30 the day after tomorrow, provided there weren't any unusual delays. As long as the trip itself was a smooth one, the only real delay they'd run into is finding somebody who knew the whereabouts of the Pie family. Twilight and Celestia hadn't said much to each other as they traveled. Most of their time had been spent looking out the window at the scenery and reflecting on the horrific events as of late. Periodically, Twilight would quietly repeat the mantra she studied, making sure she was able to remember it when the time was come to use it. She, like her teacher, just hoped that this journey to Dodge Junction wasn't going to go as badly as things had at Sugar Cube Corner. They had to find something to use. The princess watched calmly as the sun began to set a few hours later. She was pleased that Luna was able to manage both celestial bodies with relative ease. It didn't come as a surprise, though. Both of them were immensely powerful and capable of incredible things. Besides, if she was capable of rising the moon for 1,000 years on her own, then the Princess of the Night should have no trouble with operating the sun. Once the bright ball of light had faded away from the skies and turned a dark violet, Celestia's thoughts drifted to Pinkie Pie. With the night now upon them, it was possible that some ponies were about to head to bed soon. If only she knew where the pink mare would go next. Despite all her power, being able to see the future was beyond her limits. Even beyond the legendary star swirls. She needed to draw Pinkie away from her intended targets. The only question was, how? As the stars came out one by one, Celestia quietly retired to her cabin, trying to figure out a way to bait Pinkie Pie. Whatever she eventually came up with, she had to be subtle, but she also had to remember that she and Twilight weren't completely ready. A cautious approach was necessary. Twilight had entered the cabin a short while ago, and not long after they had fallen asleep for the night. Celestia couldn't imagine what must have been going on in her mind. All the stress and heartache. It reminded her of what she went through when her younger sister had become the twisted monstrosity that was Nightmare Moon, and the actions that soon followed. As always, Celestia cast her protective spells over Twilight as she rested. She was not going to lose her student and friend, no matter the cost. She continued to think of a way to get Pinkie's attention as the hours passed. It was proving to be more difficult than she originally anticipated. Celestia needed a carrot to dangle in front of the pink pony's nose, but what could it be? And then an idea suddenly came to her. Based on what Spike mentioned in his letter, the reason that Pinkie wanted one thing more than anything else. Twilight. She hated the idea of using her precious student to lure Pinkie away from her rampage, but it was one of the only plausible options she was able to think of. It was a fair risk, but her spells making Twilight's presence in the dream world could be modified a bit without entirely leaving her unprotected. If Unicorn were to find herself in trouble, the princess could easily restore the spell back to its full potential, and Twilight would be safe again. She sighed, wishing Luna wasn't so busy being stuck with her workload all day and night. Her dream-walking abilities would come in handy in such a situation. At the same time, Celestia didn't want to put her sister in harm's way. She had to deal without her by her side for thousands of years. The thought of never seeing her again would be too much for the ancient Alicorn. As Twilight slept, Celestia's horn glowed faintly as to not disturb her, the protective spells hard at work. Taking in a deep, nervous breath, the princess eased up on her magic, her horn fading slightly, leaving the room illuminated almost solely by the full moon's light shining in through the window. A tan-colored older stallion sat in his dark green rocking chair, reading a paper he picked up from town earlier in the day. It was the evening edition. It always was. Being as far out of town as he and his wife were, made it virtually impossible to get an early morning newspaper, but at least he was relatively in the loop. An odd headline caught his attention, and he had been reading through the article carefully. Apparently, the previous evening had been rather interesting as well as the early afternoon day. Clyde had heard all about some tale with the Appaloosans and a nearby buffalo tribe fighting about something and later on making amends a while back. Seems that, according to the story in the newspaper, the buffalo chief was found dead in the sheriff's office, and the sheriff himself was only suspected they had. Unfortunately, the following day the officer was found disemboweled and hanging from the bars of the jail cell before his trial even began. The old stallion was happy that such things didn't happen around his rock farm or in Dodge Junction. He wondered, as he read, who could have done such terrible things. The warm glow of the fireplace on the other side of the room helped to alleviate the concern he felt as he read. For some reason it had been chillier than it was supposed to have been for the most day, and that evening was particularly stone cold. It almost felt like a chill blew through the cottage, despite the windows being shut. The fur stood on end of his forelimbs briefly as he shivered, and his off-white wife stepped into the room and sat in the adjacent chair. "Strange cold we've had today," she said. She undid the blue and white striped scarf she was wearing and rubbed her small glasses clean. Was all Clyde responded with. He was never much for talking. A quiet moment passed before the mare spoke again, as she enjoyed the fire. "I don't know about you, dear, but I wouldn't mind having an extra hoof around the farm tomorrow. Been rather exhausted lately. The south side has some particularly large rocks that need to be worked on, and I'll be honest, I don't look forward to it," she said bluntly. "It was nice when the girls were still around. Hard workers." "Indeed. Well, all except Pinkie after that one day. Granted, it was still a pleasant, if not unusual day. But she did get her cutie mark, so that was nice." Sue paused, unsure if she should ask what she wanted to. She threw caution to the wind. "Do you ever think about them, Clyde? The girls, I mean." "Occasionally. They have their own lives now. Couldn't keep them here forever if we wanted to," he said mundanely as he turned a page. "I suppose so. I do hope things turn out okay for them." "I'm sure they're fine." Sue shivered hard and hugged herself tightly as another gust of unseen wind swept through their den. If Clyde was feeling chilled, he sure wasn't letting on. "Dear, it's getting a bit late. Do you want to turn in? We do have to get started early tomorrow, you know that." He glanced at the clock and blinked in mild surprise. Guess you're right. Go ahead and get ready. I'll put out the fire in the meantime. Clyde folded up the paper and set it down at the end table next to his rocking chair, while Sue retired to the bedroom. Grunting, his old bones aching in the cold, he trotted up to the fireplace and grabbed a bucket of water next to it, gently pouring it onto the burning wood. He made a point in his mind to clean it up tomorrow after the chores were done. It was too chilly to do anything like that tonight, and he was getting tired. Once the last bits of fire melted out of existence, he replaced the bucket and headed to bed, where his wife lay waiting to say good night. He couldn't deny that, right now, the blanket looked and felt great. A few minutes after getting comfortable, the couple turned and fell asleep. Sue looked over to Inky and Blinky after swinging her pickaxe down on the rock in front of her. She and Clyde were breaking up the rocks on the west field, while the two gray fillies were shifting the ones just to the north, pushing them along the ground in the direction of their parents. The kids never could figure out exactly what the purpose of the whole routine was. There were rarely any gems found in the stones, and if there were, they were unceremoniously tossed away like trash. They missed their younger sister. For whatever reason, in the dead gray home they lived in, she was a bright shade of pink. Well, bright enough. There was still a faint dim quality behind the color of her coat, though. Soon after she got her cutie mark, she was a lively, cheerful pony, something the family never understood or experienced. "Come on, girls, pick up the pace," Clyde shouted. "We got half the farm to go still." An eye twitched for both of them, and they glared at their parents from behind a small pile of rocks they had accumulated. They looked at each other and sat down, out of sight, giggling and laughing out suddenly. This piqued the older couple's curiosity, and they walked to where they heard the commotion. When they arrived, they blinked in surprise. Their daughters had changed into a pair of babies playing patty cake, and somehow talking despite their obviously young age. 1, 2, Pinky's coming for you. 3, 4, better lock your door. 5, 6, get your friendship fixed. 7, 8, gonna stay up late. 9, 10, never sleep again. Sue took a step back at the freaking sight, when Pumpkin and Pound Cake turned and glazed over with them large, empty eyes. The children turned back to each other and repeated their song. "Clyde, I don't like this." She stared motionlessly at the particular pair before speaking up. "Yeah, what's going on? Where are Inky and Blinky?" The husband and wife called out for the kids, unaware of the large number of rocks rolling into a pile behind them. The stones spun in circles as the stash grew bigger in size, consolidating into a giant round boulder. When it finally reached its intended massive size, it began to roll at them. The rumbling on the ground caught Clyde's and Sue's attention, and they shrieked in panic.